The Tuskegee Syphilis Study, starting in 1932, is often cited as one of the darkest chapters of unethical medical research in American history. This experiment began in Macon County, Alabama, where a total of 600 African American men were enrolled under the pretense of receiving treatment for what was called bad blood, a local term used to describe a variety of illnesses, including syphilis, anemia, and fatigue. Most were poor sharecroppers who had little access to medical care. 399 with syphilis and 201 without were recruited based on promises of free health care, meals, and even burial insurance, something very attractive to them in the context of the Great Depression. These promises, however, cloaked a more sinister reality. The men were subjects of a study that aimed at observing untreated syphilis in its natural course. They were informed that they would receive medical treatment, but as a matter of fact, the care dispensed consisted only of placebos like aspirin and mineral supplements. When the study started, syphilis was rampant and treatments were dangerous and mostly ineffective. Early in the study, USPHS justified its approval by presenting an opportunity to better understand the full progression of the disease within a population that would likely not seek treatment on its own. This assumption itself was imbued with common racial biases of the time period. Scientific racism was strong and favored such systems where African Americans were seen as less capable of making independent medical decisions or understanding complex treatments. These prejudices were cultivated by a medical world that embraced pseudoscientific theories, portraying African Americans as morally and biologically different. All this happened against the backdrop of a society still reeling from slavery, with discrimination integrated into its very fabric. By the early 20th century, ideas such as social Darwinism and eugenics led to beliefs in racial hierarchies that further ostracized African Americans. Distorted science even supported the myth that black people had a greater tolerance for pain and reduced cognitive capacities, ideas used throughout history to justify everything from slavery to unethical experiments. The USPHS had said that it had selected Macon County because as many as 35% of its population was infected with syphilis. When initial recruitment proved less than expected, researchers started examining women and children to dispel rumors that medical examinations were a form of military conscription. This study, initially anticipated to last 6 months, persisted for 40 years. In 1933, during the Great Depression, researchers decided to pursue the project indefinitely by replacing healthy participants when those in the syphilis-positive group became infected. The subjects were given fake treatments during this period in the form of ointments or pills that contained just enough mercury and neoorsphenamine to keep the participants believing they were receiving treatment. By 1943, medical advances led to the Henderson Act, requiring testing and treatment of venereal diseases. In 1947, penicillin was accepted as the cure for syphilis. These discoveries were ignored, however, while the researchers, in hopes of keeping the study ongoing, denied treatment to the men and persuaded local doctors and the Alabama Health Department to do and say nothing. The USPHS stepped in after some participants were drafted into World War II and were diagnosed with syphilis during their entrance medical exams, ensuring that they were taken out of the military to prevent their treatment. These actions turned what was initially passive observation into active manipulation, continuing harm to maintain the deceptive premise of the study. As the study wore on into new generations of researchers, each inherited the project and added new ethical violations. By 1952, despite efforts by the researchers to deny it, about 30% of participants had secured other sources of penicillin. The USPHS nonetheless continued to claim that the men would never go in for treatment on their own or cooperate with treatment programs. These claims ignored the pivotal fact that the men had no incentive to pursue other care because they thought they were already being treated. By 1965, however, the researchers were repeating the claim that penicillin did little good in advanced stages of the disease, a false and self-serving argument, since it had long been established that penicillin could stop the disease at any stage. While the Tuskegee study continued, much development had been made on global ethical guidelines. This fact was underscored by the 1947 Nuremberg Code, established after Nazi atrocities committed during war were publicly disclosed. It specified a minimum requirement for the protection of human subjects by citing informed consent. In 1964, the World Medical Association, in its Declaration of Helsinki, further emphasized those principles. For its part, however, the USPHS and the CDC, assuming responsibility for the study, decided to disregard them. Even as late as 1969, a CDC review committee concluded that the study should proceed, despite these clear international ethical standards. The public became aware of the Tuskegee Syphilis Study only because of the efforts of a whistleblower, Peter Buxton. Buxton, a disease investigator in the mid-1960s, started filing internal complaints with USPHS regarding the morality of the study. His warnings were ignored. Determined to expose the truth, Buxton called Jean Heller, an investigative reporter for the Associated Press. The story broke on the front page in July 1972 and set off a public outcry. The outcry led to the study's termination, but by that time, irreversible damage had already been done. The facts were clear and disturbing. 128 participants had died from syphilis or related complications, 40 spouses had contracted the disease, and 19 children were born with congenital syphilis. In 1973, Congress held hearings to investigate the many failures of the study. Meanwhile, a class action lawsuit led by the NAACP led to a $10 million out-of-court settlement that provided lifelong medical care for the participants and their families. The psychological and social implications, however, remain serious. The Tuskegee study severely damaged the trust of African American communities in the medical establishment, casting doubts that continue to resonate in participation in medical studies and acceptance of public health programs today. President Bill Clinton addressed this lack of trust in 1997 when he made a formal apology in a White House ceremony, labeling the ethical violations as morally wrong. He did this along with the establishment of the National Center for Bioethics in Research and Healthcare at Tuskegee University to assist in healing and to serve as a reminder of the importance of ethics in research. The Tuskegee legacy influenced policy and led to the passage of the National Research Act of 1974, which required IRB approval for research involving human subjects and informed consent. The Tuskegee study's shadow extends well beyond its ending. For so many African Americans, any understanding as to why they might still distrust medical systems and resist participating in research stems from this and similar incidents. Unethical practices were revealed again in experiments conducted in Guatemala between 1946 and 1948, where nearly 700 men and women had been intentionally infected with syphilis under the direction of Dr. John Cutler, the same man involved in the Tuskegee study. This came to light as late as 2010 through the work of historian Susan Reverby, after which President Barack Obama and other officials apologized for those events. The continuation of these practices into the 20th century shows how essential constant vigilance and systemic change are. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study stands out as a grim reminder of the tragic consequences caused when racism is mixed with bad science. It also happens to be one of the key case studies used in teaching transparency in human rights protection and informed consent for research. The mistrust it created continues to influence conversations on ethics in medicine and public health. For the present and future generations, acknowledgement and lessons drawn from such historical wrongs play an important role in ensuring that no community is ever exploited in such a way again. If this journey has been informative, comments are welcome in the comment section below, as well as subscriptions for more detailed analysis of other important moments in history.